Hi everyone, welcome to my Shoreline Studio. I'm Sybille Muschik. Well, we're continuing on with working out in the field with plein air painting. And I want to introduce some sight sizing because it makes things a lot easier as to the proportions of items. And basically you hold an object like a pencil in the distance and you gauge how big something is. Now, when you're working from a photograph, it's slightly different. Here's my photograph, and I'm going to just sight size using the island as our gauge. We'll just say how many islands are, say, what's the height from here to here. So, okay, here's our island. Okay, how many islands? 1, 2, and 3 to the bottom of the island. So then you know, and do that with everything else. You can gauge the tree, you can gauge the depth of the water. Always when you're sketching, your format should be the same as what you're working with. Our gel plate is 8 by 10, so it's longer, and I'm doing it horizontally. Okay, so we're just going to arbitrarily say, okay, the island is going to be this size. You might have to adjust up and down. There's my island. I don't know if you can see that or not. I'll try to make it darker. So I'm going to use this as a measurement. Here's my island, and we had from the island about 3 to the very top. So here's 1, 2, and 3. Out there. So that's your mark. So mark it off. Now the tree was 2 islands, I think, and you're going to have to just gauge exactly where this is going to come down. Okay, so here's your island again, and your tree was starting about here, and then where does it end up? It was 2 islands. So here, and that would be the size of your tree. If this would be an animal, then that would give you the right size of the animal compared to the rest of the landscape. You see what I mean? So try that, and you'll get your compositions working much better. So I think you get the idea, and that's it helps you to gauge distances, and you don't make one thing bigger than another. If you have animals in your scene, for example, then they're not going to be enormous, and it looks really strange when you do that. So use your sight sizing, and it will make things a lot simpler. Now I'm also introducing yellow ochre, Naples Yellow hue. It's called a hue because it used to be made with lead, which is very poisonous, so now they're making it less toxic. It's a beautiful color. We're going to use this as our base color, and then we'll use our usual colors that I work with, and it's always golden open when I'm doing our printmaking. So when you're out in the field, try and paint as quickly as possible. You're up against the elements, and you're against the light shifting. You know, as the sun moves in the sky, your shadows are going to change, all sorts of features are going to change, your colors are going to change. So take a small canvas and work as quickly as possible so that you get the essence. Or work as slowly as you want and then come back day after day at the same time and until you finish the piece. So it's 2 ways of working with it. Often you don't get the chance to come back, so for me, it's work as quickly as possible and just hope for the best. And so the paintings as a result are very fresh, very loose, and very impressionistic, and that's kind of the way I like it. We'll be posting those as usual in the video. Now try and capture the essence of the scene. Get the feeling of where you are. Be at one with your subject. You know, whether it's the animal that's getting a drink, you know, a deer or something at the side of the river, which we were watching. The way the trees are, in the landscape, whether they're gnarled and old or fresh and young. you know, be aware of your surroundings, the air, everything about plein air painting is unique, and just expand and let it come to you, and then your paintings will be lovely. So here we are on the Fraser River. We're on a cliff edge, just on a little bit of a ledge, and I'm doing my thumbnail and value study, and then blocking in very quickly, probably with a bit of burnt sienna, my composition, getting position. And you don't see me, but I am doing some site sizing. I'm using the island as sort of my scale, and then putting that, all the pieces, you know, in the proper proportion. The sketching part is very rough. I just need basic positions, and we'll be overpainting that. I'm working on a pre-toned canvas, just a variety of colors that I'm going to be using in the composition with a violet base. And there's the little island. So even though we've speeded up the video quite a bit, I am working reasonably fast in real time, because you want to capture the light, you know, at that time. The sun will move around and then you lose the quality of it. So and I'm very aware of aerial perspective, the blueness of the background hills. I'm actually exaggerating that a little bit, and I'll probably be adjusting that as we go along. I'm painting in a darker middle tone. That's usually how I work with the composition, and then I adjust up from there. Acrylic and oil, you usually, you know, paint from dark to light. Most of this painting is done a la prima. Generally, I paint a variety of layers and glazing and so forth. But this is sort of, you know, painting as you go, doing the layers, you know, adjusting color and so forth as you paint. So not much glazing on in this whole process. That usually happens in the studio. If I'm doing a larger piece, then I'll, you know, take more time with the underlayers, do a lot of glazing and scumbling and so forth. But with alla prima, you just sort of bang it in there. It was a spectacular view. It was quite chilly that morning. But I'm working fairly furiously. Even though we've speeded up, I am working very fast. And so I'm not feeling the cold, but it did improve later. There was shadow. The trees behind us were shading a little bit so that things remain cool for quite a long time. And about noon, I think, when we stopped for lunch, things warmed up a little bit. I'm just blocking in the burnt sienna that's under the trees that will show through here and there and give some depth to that aspect of the trees, background trees. They're also grayed a little bit, just with a little bit of violet, I think. So now I'm bringing in the Naples Yellow. That's a really nice sandy color for the cliff. Even though it's a hue, they've kept the intensity of that color, which was marvelous even when it had lead in it. So now it's just a chemical combination for the color. It has a fair amount of white in it, so it is quite opaque. Because of the amount of sunlight, I'm keeping the colors fairly vivid to give you the feeling of that time of day. Everything's sunlit. The colors are intense and sharp, especially in the foreground. Now I'm working on some of the variations in the tones of the ridges on the cliff and the cliff edges, so you get a feeling of the texture of that cliff. And then slowly we start blocking in the middle ground trees. So they're not going to be quite as blue-violet as the very background trees. That's our aerial perspective at work. And as you can see, none of my colors are just one tone. I'm mixing all the time and doing a fair amount of negative painting as it's required. So as I'm coming forward from the background trees to the middle ground, you can see the value changes. The green is altering, it's a little bit warmer. I'm adding a bit of probably cad yellow mid. And there's, it looks like a cut bag, probably from logging. So there's a bit of violet. It's a nice touch to put a little bit of violet in because that was part of our underpainting as well. And that just creates interest in that background. It's just not a whole mess of trees. And then to some degree it echoes the island a little bit, that shape. Echoing is always interesting. So again, I'm painting fairly dark for that middle ground. And I tend to work pretty well all over the canvas for the most part. going from back, to front and so forth. It does help to keep your colors coordinated. And of course, every once in a while I change the angle of my brush as I need to maybe do a little scumbling, or there's a certain mark I'm trying for. I'm using a smaller brush here to get it trees, and making sure that they sort of come off the canvas, a little bit of cropping going on. And I'll be adjusting all the trees as we need to. There are lots of gullies and things that we can't really see all that well. The trees hide a lot of that, and the bushes. But I am sort of suggesting that, there are dips and valleys just to make the cliffside interesting. And then slowly bringing in some lights. As you can see from the video, the trees are sort of hugging a little shelf at the bottom, and I have absolutely emphasized that to make it even narrower, to get the feeling that the cliff is sort of precipitous and the trees are just hugging the side of the cliff. Okay, we're scumbling some more in the far distant background. Oh, and we have a little fly. I think that was one that bit me eventually. I just wasn't paying enough attention to him. I'm adding the depth in the cliffside. As I mentioned, there are all these ridges and little gullies. So by changing the color and just hinting at the possibility that there might be something lurking there, it will help get the impression of sandy areas and rocks and brush and things of that nature. I'm trying to keep it as loose as possible, or creating an impression rather than a realistic painting. And I'm very aware of the light. It is changing quite a bit as I'm working. There are clouds in the sky and the sun's peeking in and out. So we have shadows that may disappear every once in a while. So I'm trying to ignore that to some degree. So mostly now I'm concerned with middle ground painting, adding depth, layers of course, and then changing the greens so that they continue to be interesting. And I can change the greens either by lightening them with hands of yellow or some of the earth colors, or adding blue, things like either ultramarine blue or phthalo blue. I think a lot of it is phthalo blue and yellow. And so the greens are quite intense if we're adding phthalo blue. As I'm doing the trees, I'm probably loading the brush quite a bit. and just making marks that give the suggestion of the pine tree and the poplar trees. So there's not a lot of dabbing going on. I really like the blue of the water, but of course we do have to put some breaks in it, and just hate to cover up all that lovely blue, but needs to be done. I'm putting cooler colors to push back some of the trees behind the cliff edge, just to show that there's a fair amount of forest going on behind the cliff. And then giving good contrast to the spruce trees that are sitting right on the top of the cliff. And then adding some of that color into the background trees, so there's not a strange break there. And then again, in the poplars that are in the background, they need to be cooled down a bit because there's quite a bit of distance. Again, a lot of air between where I'm painting from, and so you gray it down a little bit or cool it down. Keeping quite a bit of high chroma or high intensity in the colors. I want this to feel very lush. And it's lush because we've had massive amounts of rainfall this summer. So everything, the greens seem a lot like they were in the springtime. So a forester would understand why I'm, putting those colors in. Here I'm doing some highlighting. The sun is quite brilliant on that foliage. And as always, wherever you put one color, that color should go in several parts of the painting to harmonize everything. Now I'm putting the highlights without losing some of the lovely violets that are underneath, and just with my fingers rubbing it in so that it doesn't stand out and be obtrusive. Again, a little bit of scumbling, just dragging some of that highlight color down over some of that cliff edge, and leaving some of the violets and some of the darks that was in the underpainting. And then a little bit of negative painting, just to create the shapes of things by doing it negatively. What I mean by that is that you paint around something rather than the object. Of course, you have to worry about the base of the, of the painting. So I turned it upside down just so we have the base as well as everything else harmonizing. I'm used to that kind of thing because I'm used to also painting in reverse as a printmaker. So now that ended up a little too intense for my taste. So as you can see, I'm adjusting. That's the shadow of the tree. And I'm playing with it a bit to see how it looks, how far it's going to go, what the color is, and then toning it down and wiping it off. This happens, you adjust as you go along until it works. I used a wider brush there, and then now I'm going to put some nice shadow. I'm not so concerned about shadows in this particular piece. It's all about the sunshine and not so much the depth of shadows and things. But the line work creates some interest. And of course we have to put the beaches in, and they're not going to have the same intensity as the foreground. You have to be aware of the perspective here so that it works, so that it doesn't look like the beach is going uphill. And a few shadows. By putting in the reflections, that helps bring that beach in harmony with the rest of the painting, and also fixes the perspective problems there. So we don't have a problem with the top of the tree and that bank. I've elongated the top of the evergreen tree so that it sticks up above the edge of the bank. Otherwise you have what we call a kissing problem. You don't know whether it's forward or behind or so forth, so you bring it above. And then just putting shadows on the tree trunks. It's just amazing how a mark or two will absolutely define what you're trying to say. You don't have to be slavish about painting certain details. keep it light, keep it loose, and a mark or two just does the trick, and you get what you want. And it doesn't look fussy or overworked. That's the joy of painting plein air. You don't have time to worry about too many details. You're just working furiously trying to keep the light and get the impression of the place, and don't beat yourself up over some of the details. Eyes tend to connect things. It makes sense at a distance. So I'm adding some final highlights here so that you get the distinction between all the different levels and layers, not adding too much light and so forth in the far distance. And a little bit more detail there in the little forest behind at the cliff edge. Just adjusting now, the top of the bank was quite dark, so I'm adjusting that. That's the cut bank at the back. There's a bit of a field in the background, so it's catching the light. That's why I'm adding a bit of highlight color up in there. And again, it breaks up a lot of those green things by putting another layer. And a few nice little clouds, happy little clouds. So final cloud touches here. Just altering the color a tiny bit. And not worried about the extra texture, it kind of adds interest. And there's a spot I had to get rid of. So back to the studio. So let's get on to the plate, and I hope you'll paint along with me if you have been trying some of this. We will post the pictures, and so that you can just take a copy, off your computer, and then we're going to speed up things a little bit more. So anyway, come and join me. So here on my Masterson Sta-wet palette, this is the mini one, which is good for plein air painting. We're going to start with a little bit of the Naples Yellow, and that will be our background color. Naples has a fair amount of white in it. I'm going to add a touch of alizarin crimson to warm it up. That's on here. I'll introduce the colors as I use them. Might need a bit of white with that, we'll see. And just to make it work here. This is my Canson My Tint paper. Nice heavy-duty drawing paper and great for printmaking. My Baren, up and down in circles. We'll have a look. So we have a lovely base. So I'm going to start as usual with the background. Don't forget, this is about the distance, all the in plein air where you have aerial perspective and the background trees and the hillsides are bluish. So we're going to start with that. And we'll just use a fairly good sized brush. This is a number 5 Winsor Newton University Bright. I just cleared a little bit on my palette here, and we're gonna just wet it a little bit, damp it off. So a bit of ultramarine and a little bit of diazazine violet. A hint of white just to bring out the color a little bit, otherwise you can't see it. And maybe just a touch of cerulean blue to cool it down a bit. Your distance objects are always a bit cooler. So I'm going to just ignore the tree line here. Where instead of a drawing today, we're going to be just working with the photograph. I've cropped it and altered it as if it were a thumbnail. Yeah, I'm just going to go in there. So that's our base blue. I'm going to go right to the edges. The photograph doesn't, but that's okay. We can make it up. And, you know, shift your brush as you need to make it look like there's background trees there. Let's print that. A little bit of burning. And then we have our base tree line in the background trees. That looks pretty good. Going to switch more. Now this top line of trees here next to the darker blue are a little bit lighter. So we're going to take one of our, now don't forget that yellow and blue makes green. And in this case, we're just going to add a touch of phthalo green to intensify the green. And add a bit of white just to bring out the color. A little bit more. That's raw sienna, by the way. And we could probably use some of, I've forgotten what it is. I'll think of it in a minute. I'm at that age where it's suddenly something disappears in your head. Okay, anyway, this line of trees is not very bright, but it is touched by the sun, so you're getting that, and that'll be a nice contrast to the line of blue. So let's print that and see what we have. Yellow ochre, that's what it is. Okay, just going to bring that up into the blue a touch more here. Okay, a little bit more Naples Yellow and a touch more yellow ochre. And a little bit of the green, and then so this is Hansa Yellow Opaque. So we're just going to, because there's a bit of a gap here, so let's just straighten out this gap. And nice to hold your brush a little bit further back. And that's our sunlit trees in the background. Okay, and now let's see how that prints. Much better. So you have a nice line of trees and lots of, love the brush marks when you do this. This is typical of printmaking, so that you have this really fresh look. Okay, so next, the next line of trees here, the green is not so blue. It's still, there's some dark greens and some bluish areas, but not quite so blue. So let's change a little bit of color. Okay, I'm just going to continue to use, but we're going to add the ultramarine blue into that. This will coordinate the colors. You're not going to get mud because we're using fairly analogous colors here. So bringing in, I'm just going to drop a little more green in. Give it a little bit darker. Now you can show the trees a little bit more prominently. And because we have this lovely Naples yellow in the background, you know, there are sandy areas in the hills that show up. And if you leave a few gaps, we'll probably get some anyway because the way just the printmaking works, then that's already done for you, which is why it's nice to have a base color. And you see what I mean in here. This is where your little gaps are. We could fill those in later, but for now it's okay. Now there's a whole big bank here, and it's just a little bit deeper than Naples Yellow, so let's pop that in. And what we're going to do now is, because it's pretty well all painting all these sections, is I will stop talking and we'll run it through fairly quickly. And as I get to a different section, we'll slow things down a bit, and then we'll get to it. So, right, here's the section we're talking about. It's a cut bank, I think somebody's been logging. And it's just a deeper than the Naples Yellow, just a tiny bit. So we're going to add some burnt sienna to it. So we have these banks in here now, and I'm going to get this middle distance going. So it's a green. I might just clear off the plate so I can see it more clearly. Okay, so let's get this middle section in. And it's quite sunlit, as you can see. Somewhat about almost the same tone as this one. Okay, next we're going to go maybe this section in here and these bottom trees. Again, they're all sunlit, but not as much as this tree. So Okay, let's tackle this hillside. And it's in reverse from what it is in actuality, of course, because we're doing printmaking. And everything that you print prints in reverse. So because I have it all here, it should be fairly easy to block in. Now, same thing for the edges of the, I don't know if that's an island or not, it's just part of the cliffside. And here's part of the island. We're just going to brighten that up a little bit. Have a look and see where we are. Okay. Okay, at this stage it looks a little bit of a mess. Just a bunch of brush strokes and rolls of color, but I assure you it will all come together. So let's try for where the water is. And we'll mix the water on here. Some cerulean blue. Now generally the Fraser River is quite a muddy river by the time it gets to Quesnel, which is where we are. But in the mornings it reflects the sky, and you don't see much of the muddiness. So we're going to go with the blue because it's a nice contrast to our raw sienna and Naples Yellow. So we want to keep it on the cool side, so touch of, there we go, and a little bit of the violet. I think that's pretty close. And we're just going to block that in. I'm going to ignore some trees here. Okay, good start. Now, it's kind of important if you're in a lake and so forth to always keep this line straight. Looks really funny if you curve it, and even the river is no exception. On the photograph there's a slight curve, but we're going to ignore that for the most part. So let's get on with more trees. So that's an awful lot of trees. But it's slowly coming together. Okay, we're getting the feel of the water. We need to put the island in. And a few more trees in this section. I'm not sure if that's a burnt area or what that is. It's quite, maybe some dead trees. It's quite dark, so it'll be interesting. Now we'll start on the island. I'm going to block in, it's pretty well sunlit and maybe some darker areas in the center, but it's going to be a pretty light yellow for the most part. So here we go. I'm going to use the primrose yellow. It's a little more intense. Mix that in. The leaves are starting to change when we were painting plein air, and so the yellows are toning down a little bit, which is why maybe a little bit of the raw sienna is a help. Okay, so blocking those in. It's all poplar trees, by the way, and little bushes here on the bottom of the there is a lot of birch around, but in this area it's mostly poplar. And we'll darken that in a sec. Okay, those darker trees are on the, behind the island there. We will switch brushes a little bit and pick up our dark greens again. Okay, I'm gonna just switch off the light box again because I have to see. Okay, we need this section in here, and that has to do with this tree here. So it's a very light tree, so let's block that in. And I might put a few little clouds. We'll keep that tone. I don't know if I'm bringing in any blue or not. We'll think about that after. And we need to put some details, because these trees are forward, so we should be able to get some nice details in there. And maybe shore up our hillside here a little bit. Okay, let's put some details in this tree. Trees, lots of trees in there. Okay, we need some middle value in here. That would help. And probably in here as well. So we're going to... That's dioxazine. No, it's not. Okay, we'll just ignore that. Okay, getting a bit better, just a little bit more. Now we have to shore up this area. And we're going to need some movement in the water. And I probably will introduce some blue into the sky a little bit. Okay, as you see, it's coming together. We're getting a little bit more interesting details. Almost ready for the highlights on these. Maybe we should put a little bit of interest in the water. There's sort of a dark area in here, and to show the river is flowing. And we might edge the island with a little bit of dark. So first the blue. Well, makes all the difference in the world, doesn't it? Okay, well, let's put the blue in the sky and right. Okay, we just needed to drag it in further there. Can do that. So in here. Okay, there's some brushy trees here on the edges, and that would just take a bit of darker color. Getting now into the little details. Just adding white to see what that looks like. That's a pretty middle tone gray. So we'll maybe brown it out a little bit. This is Azo Yellow Gold, this one here. I remembered. Okay, let's put our little funny trees in. I'm going to use my bridge for this one and just twirling the brush. Just maybe add a touch more violet. It's quite dark. Just bits of brush here and there so you can be quite creative, dragging some of this stuff out. I've cleaned off the plate so that I can see some details here and there. These are just the final touches that make a painting interesting. In this case, a monotype print, a painterly monotype print. And I'll just pop in some of those little trees. Okay, so I'm just going to go over the yellow ochre, raw sienna a little bit in here just to tie things in. So it's pretty much our base color, but it's very flat, so we just want to give it some character here. Okay, that's pretty good. Let's put just a little bit of darkness at the base of this island, and then we'll pump up that foliage here, especially in the light area. Okay, in here that would be nice too. Okay, the only thing that still bothers me is this tree, and that's here. So a little bit more light there. And then I think we pretty well have it under control. Okay, so final touches. I'm going to put more blue up here just to make that read better with the water. I might try a few little branches in here just to indicate that those are evergreen trees. And then I think we pretty well have it under control. Okay, let's try for the background. And then we'll put a little bit of that blue down in here. Just maybe that blue could be a little bit darker, especially here against that headland. It's the last little tweaks that always get to you. So I'm going to put it right against the headland here. I've exaggerated that a little bit, but I think that's what it takes. It gives that essence that I'm talking about. I might just damp it off a little bit. Yeah. And it has that quality, this brush quality that I'm looking for. It's extremely expressionistic, but that's how I was feeling in the day. It's the light, it's the darkness of the trees, it's the blue of the water, it's all those things. That was part of what was happening that day. And that's what you're trying to capture, and it's not meant to be realistic or so true to what's out there, but it's true to yourself and true to the feeling you had at the time. So thanks for joining me again here at Shoreline Studio, and have fun with this if you're going to try and paint along, and we'll see how you do. Take care, and thanks for watching, and we'll see you another time. Bye for now.